Hi! You're kind of behind the scenes now. You're behind the scenes of the Psychedelic Neuroscience Masterclass. We've got quite a small team here. So, some sake. Kit Kat clock, he keeps time. We have, oh yeah, this guy. So he's kind of just someone to kind of bounce ideas off. Fuck off. Yeah, so it's really quiet. It's quite late. Bloody hell. Bloody hell. Yeah, so we're kind of deep now. Oh, it's very quiet here in Okinawa, and I do the recording at night because I don't have windows. No, I do have windows. I don't have curtains. I don't have any curtains. I've got just glass, but I've got an ocean view. It's fucking beautiful. Oh my god! Wow. But yeah, I hate curtains. I hate curtains for some reason. They're just annoying, aren't they? You need a lot of curtains to cover all my windows. I threw the curtains away, burned them. I didn't burn them. No. I don't know where they are actually. Anyway, I'm rambling. But yeah, so yeah, behind the scenes, you see me busying away. Yeah, busying away. And this is actually, now we're here, this is Unit 7. So let's I've broken the fourth wall. I kind of regret that now. Broken the fourth wall. That's what they say, right? Broken the fourth wall. He's broken the fourth wall. You can do it strategically, though. That's what I've learned. So this is strategic breaking of the fourth wall. But this is not the fourth unit. This is the 7th unit. 8th if you count Unit 0, which was the... No. What was that? That was the trailer. Unit 0 was just the... No, this is the 7th unit. Let's not confuse them. Hey, Kit Kat. What? Fuck off. Unit 7. What's up, YouTube? All right. Good to see you again. Got the Jack Daniels. Got the vaporizing device. All right. Woo! So I feel like this is kind of a bit of an excuse for a party, yeah? Yeah? You down with that? Yeah? Because I've got the hat as well. Told you're supposed to wear that backwards. So yeah, we've I kind of got this feeling that time is right for a bit of a celebration, because you know we've come so far. I feel like we can see the finish line in the distance, and it's all very exciting. You know, we've been working hard. You've been working hard. I've been working fucking hard as well, to be honest. Over the last 6 units. This is Unit 7. This is when we're going to kind of bring together everything we've been learning over the last 6 units. Everything we've learned about the brain, everything we've learned about the way the brain constructs your model of reality using information, the role of sensory information in sculpting that model of your reality, how receptors function, how psychedelic drugs specifically activate receptors, how that leads to the activation of signaling pathways inside neurons, and in particular how activation of the 5-HT2A receptor, together with crosstalk with the mGlu2 receptor, leads to depolarization of the neurons. which ultimately leads to this psychedelic effect, this dramatic change in your perception, the dramatic change in the structure and dynamics of your world model. But what we haven't done yet is kind of bridge that gap. Take this off now. I think that's enough of that. What we haven't done, it's warm. What we haven't done yet, and what we are going to do in Unit 7, this big unit, is big and important unit, is crucial unit, is we are going to bridge the gap between depolarization of neurons generally by activation of the 5-HT2A receptor and how that leads to the psychedelic effect. So we're filling in kind of the last pieces of this grand puzzle, that we have been constructing over the last 6 units. So yes, it is a cause for celebration in my humble opinion. So yeah, I'll drink to that. It's tea. Oh, lovely. Okay, so where do we start? So I think the best thing to do is to begin by kind of going back and just revisiting and revising what we learned about the construction of the world model, just so it's kind of refresh it in your memory. It is a couple of units back now since we last discussed that, but it will just be revision. And then we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper, and we're going to look a little bit more deeply at the structures of columns and how columns are connected, because that's going to be an important feature of this unit, is thinking about the connectivity that we have discussed in earlier units, but we discussed it at quite a high level and didn't really go into details about connections. Okay, great. So let's have a look at, or let's revise what we've kind of already know about the construction of your world model. Okay, so here, this is all very, very familiar to you now. So on the top here, you can see kind of our bird's eye view representation of world model construction by your brain. You can see sensory information here, which we know is being predicted in a top-down fashion by this hierarchical model of your world, which is constructed by these patterns of cortical columns. So this upper highest level of your model basically predicts the pattern of activation in the lower parts of the hierarchy, which predicts the pattern of activation down here in the lowest region of the visual cortical hierarchy, which is itself basically charged with trying to predict sensory information. Right at the bottom here, the sensory information coming into the brain via patterns of action potentials. And then at the bottom here, we see the slightly more, I guess, sort of detailed version of what you're seeing on the top, basically. So each of these here represents a single cortical column with the deep layer of the deep layers really of the cortical columns, and then we have the superficial layers in blue. The deep layers are charged with making these predictions about what's going on in the lower order regions of the cortical hierarchy. These predictions are transmitted in a top-down fashion from level to level of the hierarchy, ultimately trying to predict the sensory information here. Then the sensory information is compared to the predictions, and any errors are transmitted up the hierarchy such that the model can be refined on an ongoing kind of rolling basis to kind of try and minimize these prediction errors. Yeah, all seems great. Great, 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 great. Okay, so let's look at this this diagram again. So one thing that we, or I, should I say, tried to stress a lot was the role of connectivity. And the idea that this pattern of connections, which I'm kind of highlighting here, this pattern of connections is extremely important in sculpting your world model. In that the connections provide a way for information to flow between cortical columns. So this cortical column here, maybe I should change the color for this. Something that stands out a bit more, maybe the red, that's good. So this cortical column can influence and be affected by cortical columns to which it is connected. And this helps to sculpt the patterns of cortical column activity, which is ultimately the information that is your model of the world. It's your phenomenal world, your own personal subjective reality. Okay, so of course this is an extremely simplified diagram with kind of obviously massively simplified representations of columns and their connections. But of course, if we were to look at a slice of cortex under the microscope, it would actually look something kind of like this. So this is a beautiful image. I'm afraid I can't remember where I got it from. But anyway, and this shows many of the neurons within the cortical columns. And this is actually showing a particularly important type of neuron. Now, if I were to kind of show the cortical columns, it's not straightforward here. But you might see kind of, you know, this is kind of like part of the cortical columns, kind of like this. So each cortical column is itself this complex network of neurons, and you can even see the kind of the cell bodies of these neurons, which are kind of highlighted here and here and here, etc. So each cortical column is a complex network of neurons, and there are connections between the cortical columns, which are, of course, the connections fundamentally between the neurons that form the cortical columns. Okay, so what we need to do is think a little bit about the structure of cortical columns a little bit more deeply than we have before. So we've already, right at the beginning, when we first started talking about cortical columns, we kind of, well, I keep saying we, I, me, just me. I was emphasizing that these cortical columns have a number of layers, a number of identified layers, and we didn't really go too much into detail about the functions of these layers or the connections between these layers, and we don't need to so much. We did kind of separate the columns into what we call, you know, the deep layers and the superficial layers. You know, the superficial layers closest to the surface of the cortex, and the deep layers, well, deep down, and that was important because these deep and the superficial layers have different roles in the construction of the world model within the kind of the information flow up and down the cortical hierarchy that we discussed. But in this unit, we really need to go a little bit deeper still, because we need to talk about how these cortical columns are connected to each other. And of course, when we talk about connections in the brain, you should know by now that we're talking about synaptic connections. Now, there are other types of connections in the brain that we're not going to talk about, but we are going to focus on synaptic connections. And it's synaptic connections that are fundamental here. So when we say two cortical columns are connected to each other, what we're saying is that there are the axons essentially coming from neurons in one column and connecting synaptically to dendrites of neurons in other columns, right? That's how neurons speak to each other. We have axons, synapse, dendrite, presynaptic neuron, dendrite, synapse, postsynaptic neuron. This is something we learned way back in Unit 1, so that's nothing new there. But what we need to do here is we need to think about the actual types of neurons involved. Now, there are a number of types of neurons that are important in the function of cortical columns. We're going to ignore just about all of them. Not because they're not important, they are, but simply because they're not important for the puzzle that we are completing in this unit. They're not essential for you to understand how psychedelic drugs work. So we're going to focus on one particular type of neuron that is absolutely essential and critical. And this is called the pyramidal cell. The pyramidal cell is, there are a number of types of pyramidal cells, and again, they're found in different type areas of the brain, different parts of the brain. We're going to focus on one particular type of pyramidal cell in one particular layer of the cortical columns, in particular in the deep layers. There is a particular type of pyramidal cell that is essential and seems to be the main site of psychedelic drug action. And simply using these neurons and understand. Oh, Jack Daniels is repeating on me. It's not Jack Daniels, it's tea. It's good though. Jasmine tea. Sanpincha in Japanese. Yeah, so there is this one particular type of neuron, this pyramidal cell that we can use, and from that we can fill out our understanding perfectly. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at this pyramidal cell, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so pyramidal cells. So a pyramidal cell is a type of neuron. Now, what's interesting about the pyramidal cell is that its cell body looks like this. Yeah, it's kind of pyramid shaped, hence the name. So this is the cell body. Now, what else do we need in any neuron? Well, of course, a neuron needs an axon. Now, the axon from the pyramidal cell comes kind of from here like this, so it looks like this. Sometimes it will be branched. So here's the bouton. So we've got a couple of boutons there. And the dendrites. So there are actually two types of dendrite. So I should label this for good measure. Axon. So the two types of dendrites that we're interested in, that are important in pyramidal cells. Now, one set of dendrites, they kind of come from here, like this. And the dendrites are often very branched, kind of like this. These are called basal dendrites. Why are they called basal dendrites? Simply because they kind of sprout from the base of the cell body. You've then got another type of dendrite, which is often very, very long, very branched towards the tip, up here like this. Often reaching right up from the deep layers of the cortex, deep layers of the cortex, yeah, the cortical column, upwards, often up right through the upper layers. And this is called the apical dendrite, or the apical dendrites. Why? Because it emerges from the apex of the pyramid-shaped cell body. So these pyramidal cells, why not write that? Are sometimes referred to as deep pyramidal cells because they sit deep within the layers of the cortex, and thus deep within the layers of the cortical columns. So they kind of, if you imagine that this is one of the layers of the cortex. So this is, we're actually interested here in layer 5, and then you've got the other layers kind of up like this all the way up to layer 1, and these apical dendrites will actually reach up to the upper layers. So this pyramidal cell is just like any other neuron in that it receives information via its dendrites, so it can receive information through its basal dendrites, for example, and of course also via its apical dendrite. And just like any other neuron, it sends its action potentials out along its axon. So that's the pyramidal cell, and as I said, although there are many other types of neurons within a cortical column, it's the pyramidal cells that are important. So within this deep layer of the column, you have lots of these pyramidal cells, and these pyramidal cells can be connected to pyramidal cells of other columns, which allows columns to be connected to each other. So in other words, when a pyramidal cell fires an action potential, it travels along its axon and can then be connected directly or indirectly to pyramidal cells of other columns, which then obviously can then activate the neurons within that column. So it provides a means of information flowing between columns, and that's the basis of this kind of cortical column connectivity that I have been kind of stressing and talking about for the last few units. Great. Okay, great. So in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about pyramidal cells, and we're actually going to see how these pyramidal cells are connected to each other and how that relates to the structure of your world model. So I will see you, where's my fucking hat? There it is. I'll see you in the next video. Peace. Yeah, peace.